Hello, this is Morel Bernard with the continuation of the story, Dracula. Last words were that a whole week of waiting, daily telegrams to Goldman, but only the same story, not yet reported. Nina's morning and evening hypnotic answer is unvaried, lapping waves, rushing water, and creaking mast. So, I will continue by saying that Telegram, October the 24th, says, Zarina Catherine reported this morning from Dardanelles. And of course we know that the Zarina Catherine is the ship where Count Dracula is supposed to be on, that ship. So, and by the way, before I proceed further, please subscribe to the channel Study Coach UK and please share. Thank you very much. So, I will now continue. Dr. Seward's diary, 25th October. How I miss my phonograph. To write diary with a pen is irksome to me, but Van Heslin says I must. We were all wild with excitement yesterday when Goldman got his telegram from Lloyd's. I know now what men feel in battle when the call to action is heard. Mrs. Harker, alone of our party, did not show any signs of emotion. After all, it is not strange that she did not, for we took special care not to let her know anything about it. And we all tried not to show any excitement when we were in her presence. In old days, she would, I'm sure, have noticed, no matter how we might have tried to conceal it. But in this way, she's greatly changed during the past 3 weeks. The lethargy grows upon her, and though she seems strong and well, and is getting back some of her colour, Van Heslin and I are not satisfied. We talk of her often. We have not, however, said a word to the others. It would break poor Harker's heart, certainly his nerve, if he knew that we had even a suspicion on the subject. Van Heslin examines, he tells me, her teeth very carefully, whilst she's in the hypnotic condition. For he says that so long as they do not begin to sharpen, there is no active danger for change in her. If this change should come, it will be necessary to take steps. We both know what those steps would have to be, though we do not mention our thoughts to each other. We should neither of us shrink from the task, awful though it to be contemplated. Euthanasia is an excellent and a comforting word. I am grateful to whoever invented it. It is only about 24 hours' sail from the Dardanelles to here, at the rate the Zarina Catherine has come from London. She should therefore arrive sometime in the morning, but as she cannot possibly get in before then, we are all about to retire early. We shall get up at 1 o'clock so as to be ready. 25th October, noon. No news yet of the ship's arrival. Mrs. Harker's hypnotic report this morning was the same as usual, so it is possible that we may get news at any moment. We men are all in a fever of excitement, except Harker, who is calm. His hands are cold as ice. And an hour ago I found him wetting the edge of the great Gurkha knife, which he now always carries with him. It will be a bad lookout for the Count if the edge of that curry ever touches his throat, driven by that stern ice-cold hand. Van Heslin and I were a little alarmed about Mrs. Harker today. About noon, she got into a sort of lethargy, which we did not like, although we kept silence to the others. We were neither of us happy about it. She had been restless all the morning, so that we were at first glad to know that she was sleeping. When, however, her husband mentioned casually that she was sleeping so soundly that he could not wake her, we went to her room to see for ourselves. She was breathing naturally and looked so well and peaceful that we agreed that the sleep was better for her than anything else. Poor girl, she has so much to forget that it is no wonder that sleep, if it brings oblivion to her, does her good. Later, our opinion was justified. For when after a refreshing sleep of some hours she woke up, she seemed brighter and better than she had been for days. At sunset she made the usual hypnotic report. Wherever he may be in the Black Sea, the Count is hurrying to his destination, to his doom, I trust. 26th October. Another day, and no tidings of the Tsarina Catherine. She ought to be here by now. That she is still journeying somewhere is apparent, for Mrs. Harker's hypnotic report at sunrise was still the same. It is possible that the vessel may be lying by at times for fog. Some of the steamers which came in last evening reported patches of fog both to north and south of the port. We must continue our watching, as the ship may now be signalled any moment. 27th October. Noon. Most strange. No news yet of the ship we wait for. Mrs. Harker reported last night and this morning as usual, lapping waves and rushing water, though she added that the waves were very faint. The telegrams from London have been the same. No further report. Van Heslin is terribly anxious, and told me just now that he fears the Count is escaping us. He added significantly, I did not like that lethargy of Madame Mina's. Souls and memories can do strange things during trance. I was about to ask him more, but Harker just then came in, and he held up a warning hand. We must try tonight at sunset to make her speak more fully when in a hypnotic state. 28 October. Telegram. Rufus Smith, London, to Lord Godalming. Care HBM Vice Consul Varna. Tsarina Catherine reported entering Galatz at 1 o'clock today. Dr. Seward's Diary. 28 October. When the telegram came announcing the arrival in Galatz, I do not think it was such a shock to any of us as might have been expected. True, we did not know whence or how or when the boat would come, but I think we all expected that something strange would happen. The delay of arrival at Varna made us individually satisfied that things would not be just as we had expected. We only waited to learn where the change would occur. Nonetheless, however, was it a surprise? I suppose that nature works on such a hopeful basis that we believe against ourselves that things will be as they ought to be, not as we should know that they will be. Transcendentalism is a beacon to the angels, even if it be a will of the wisped man. It was an odd experience, and we all took it differently. Van Heslin raised his hand over his head for a moment, as though in remonstrance with the Almighty. But he said not a word, and in a few seconds stood up with his face sternly set. Lord Godalming grew very pale, and sat breathing heavily. I was myself half stunned, and looked in wonder at one after another. Quincey Morris tightened his belt with that quick movement which I knew so well. In our old wandering days it meant action. Mrs. Harker grew ghastly white, so that the scar on her forehead seemed to burn, but she folded her hands meekly and looked up in prayer. Harker smiled, actually smiled, the dark, bitter smile of one who is without hope, but at the same time his action belied his words, for his hands instinctively sought the hilt of the great curry knife and rested there. "When does the next train start for Galatz?" said Van Heslin to us generally. "At 6:30 tomorrow morning." We all started, for the answer came from Mrs. Harker. "How on earth do you know?" said Art. "Do you forget? Or perhaps you do not know, though Jonathan does, and so does Dr. Van Heslin, that I am the train fiend. At home in Exeter, I always used to make up the timetables so as to be helpful to my husband. I found it so useful sometimes that I always make a study of the timetables now. I knew that if anything were to take us to Castle Dracula, we should go by Galatz, or at any rate through Bucharest. So I learned the times very carefully. Unhappily, there are not many to learn, as the only train tomorrow leaves, as I say." "Wonderful woman," murmured the professor. "Can't we get a special?" asked Lord Godalming. Van Heslin shook his head. "I fear not. This land is very different from yours or mine. Even if we did have a special, it would probably not arrive as soon as our regular train. Moreover, we have something to prepare. We must think. Now, let us organize. You, friend Arthur, go to the train and get the tickets, and arrange that all be ready for us to go in the morning. Do you, friend Jonathan, go to the agent of the ship and get from him letters to the agent in Galatz, with authority to make search the ship, just as it was here. Maurice Quincey, you see the vice-consul, and get his aid with his fellow in Galatz, and all he can do to make our way smooth, so that no times be lost when over the Danube. John will stay with Madame Mina and me, and we shall consult. For so if time be long, you may be delayed, and it will not matter when the sun set, since I'm here with Madame to make report." "And I," said Mrs. Harker brightly, and more like her old self than she had been for many a long day, "shall try to be of use in any ways, and shall think and write for you as I used to do. Something is shifting from me in some strange way, and I feel freer than I have been of late." The three younger men looked happy at the moment, as they seemed to realize the significance of her words. But Van Heslin and I, turning to each other, met each a grave and troubled glance. We said nothing at the time, however. When the three men had gone out to do their task, Van Heslin asked Mrs. Harker, to look up the copy of the diaries and find in the part of Harker's journal at the castle. She went away to get it. When the door was shut upon her, he said to me, "We mean the same. Speak out. There is some change. It is a hope that makes me sick, for it may deceive us." Quite so. Do you know why I asked her to get the manuscript? No, said I, unless it was to get an opportunity of seeing me alone. You are in part right, friend John, but only in part. I want to tell you something. And oh, my friend, I am taking a terrible risk, but I believe it is right. In the moment when Madame Mina said those words that arrest both our understanding, an inspiration came to me. In the trance of 3 days ago, the Count sent her his spirit to read her mind. Or more like he took her to see him in his earth box in the ship with water rushing, just as it go free at rise and set of sun. He learned then that we are here, for she had more to tell in her open life with eyes to see and ears to hear than he shut, as he is, in his coffin box. Now, he make his most effort to escape us. At present, he want her not. He is sure with his so great knowledge that she will come at his call, but he cut her off, take her, as he can do, out of his own power, that so she come not to him. Ah, there, I have hoped that our man brains that have been of man so long, and that have not lost the grace of God, will come higher than his child brain that lie in his tomb for centuries, that grow not yet to our stature, and that do only work selfish and therefore small. Here comes Madame Mina, not a word to her of her trance. She know it not, and it would overwhelm her and make despair just when we want all our hope, all our courage. When most we want all her great brain, which is trained like a man's brain, but is of sweet woman, and have a special power which the Count give her, and which he may not take away altogether, though he think not so. Hush, let me speak, and you shall learn. Oh, John, my friend, we are in awful straits. I fear as I never feared before. We can only trust the good God. Silence. Here she comes. I thought that the professor was going to break down and have hysterics, just as he had when Lucy died. But with a great effort he controlled himself and was at perfect nervous poise when Mrs. Harker tripped into the room, bright and happy looking, and in the doing of work seemingly forgetful of her misery. As she came in, she handed a number of sheets of typewriting to Van Helsing. He looked over them gravely, his face brightening up as he read. Then, holding the pages between his finger and thumb, he said, "Friend John, to you with so much of experience already, and you too, dear Madame Mina, that are young, here is a lesson. Do not fear ever to think. A half-thought has been buzzing often in my brain, but I fear to let him lose his wings. Here now, with more knowledge, I go back to where that half-thought came from, and I find that he be no half-thought at all, that be a whole thought, though so young that he is not yet strong to use his little wings. Nay, like the ugly duck of my friend Hans Andersen. He be no duck thought at all, but a big swan thought that sail nobly on big wings when the time come for him to try them. See, I read here what Jonathan have written. That other of his race who in a latter age again and again brought his forces over the great river into Turkey land, who when he was beaten back came again and again and again, though he had to come alone from the bloody field where his troops were being slaughtered, since he knew that he alone could ultimately triumph. What does this tell us? Not much. No. The Count's child thought see nothing. Therefore he speaks so free. Your man thought see nothing. My man thought see nothing. Till just now. No. But there comes another word from someone who speak without thought, because she, too, know not what it mean, what it might mean. Just as there are elements which rest, yet when in nature's course they move on their way and they touch, they poof, and there comes a flash of light heaven-wide, that blind and kill and destroy some, but that show up all earth below for leagues and leagues. Is it not so? Well, I shall explain. To begin, have you ever studied the philosophy of crime? Yes? And no? You, John? Yes? For it is a study of insanity. You? No, Madame Mina? For crime touch you not but once, still. Your mind works true and argues not a particularly universal. There is this peculiarity in criminals. It is so constant in all countries and at all times that even police who know not much from philosophy come to know it empirically, that it is. That is to be empiric. The criminal always work at one crime. That is the true criminal who seems predestinate to crime and who will of none other. This criminal has not full man brain. He is clever and cunning and resourceful, but he is not of man's stature as to brain. He be of child brain in much. Now this criminal of ours is predestinate to crime also. He too have child brain, and it is of the child to do what he have done. The little bird, the little fish, the little animal learn not by principle, but empirically, and when he learn to do, then there is to him the ground to start from to do more. Dos plus two, said Archimedes. Give me a fulcrum, and I shall move the world. To do once is the fulcrum whereby child brain becomes man brain, and until we have the purpose to do more, we continue to do the same, again every time, just as we have done before. Oh, my dear, I see that your eyes are opened, and that to you the lightning flash show all the leagues. For Mrs. Harker began to clap her hands, and her eyes sparkled. He went on. Now you shall speak. Tell us, two dry men of science, what you see with those so bright eyes. He took her hand and held it whilst she spoke. His finger and thumb closed on her pulse, as I thought instinctively and unconsciously as she spoke. The Count is a criminal, and of criminal type. Nordor and Lombroso would so classify him, and qua criminal he is of imperfectly formed mind. Thus in a difficulty he has to seek resource in habit. His past is a clue, and the one page of it that we know, and that from his own lips, tells that once before, when in what Mr. Morris would call a tight place, he went back to his own country from the land he had tried to invade, and thence, without losing purpose, prepared himself for a new effort. He came again, better equipped for his work, and won. So he came to London to invade a new land. He was beaten, and when all hope of success was lost and his existence in danger, he fled back over the sea to his home, just as formerly he had fled back over the Danube from Turkeyland. Good, good. Oh, you so clever, lady, said Van Hesselin enthusiastically as he stooped and kissed her hand. A moment later he said to me as calmly as though we had been having a sick-room consultation, 72 only, and in all this excitement I have hope. Turning to her again, he said with keen expectation, but go on, there's more to tell if you will. Be not afraid. John and I know. I do in any case, and shall tell you if you are right. Speak without fear. I will try to, but you will forgive me if I seem egotistical. Nay, fear not. You must be egotist, for it is of you that we think. Okay, then, as he's criminal, he's selfish. And as his intellect is small and his action is based on selfishness, he confines himself to one purpose. That purpose is remorseless. Has he fled over the Danube, leaving his forces to be cut to pieces? So now he's intent on being safe, careless of all. So his own selfishness frees my soul somewhat from the terrible power which he acquired over me on that dreadful night. I felt it. Oh, I felt it. Thank God for his great mercy. My soul is freer than it has been since that awful hour, and all that haunts me is a fear lest in some trance or dream he may have used my knowledge for his ends. The professor stood up. He has so used your mind, and by it he has left us here in Varna, while the ship that carried him rushed through enveloping fog up to Galat, where doubtless he had made preparation for escaping from us. But his child mind only saw so far, and it may be that, as ever in God's providence, the very thing that the evildoer most reckoned on for his selfish good turns out to be his chiefest harm. The hunter is taken in his own snare, as the great psalmist says. For now that he think he's free from every trace of us all, and that he has escaped us with so many hours to him, then his selfish childlike brain will whisper him to sleep. He think too that, as he cut himself off from knowing your mind, there can be no knowledge of him to you. There is where he fail. That terrible baptism of blood which he give you makes you free to go to him in spirit, as you have as yet done in your times of freedom when the sun rise and set. At such times you go by the volition and not by his. And this power to good of you and others, as you have won from your suffering at his hands. This is now all the more precious, that he know it not, and to guard himself have even cut himself off from his knowledge of our where. We, however, are not selfish, and we believe that God is with us through all this blackness and these many dark hours. We shall follow him, and we shall not flinch, even if we peril ourselves that we become like him. Friend John, this has been a great hour, and it have done much to advance us on our way. You must be scribe and write him all down, so that when the others return from their work, you can give it to them. Then they shall know as we do. And so, I have written it whilst we wait their return. And Mrs. Harker has written with her typewriter all since she brought the MS to us. Do join me, please. Do join me for the next episode. Join me for the next video of Dracula. I look forward to it. Yes, and please subscribe. Join me the next video of Dracula. For now, bye.